I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Honestly, I always believed that my marriage to Lisa was solid. We'd been together for almost 10 years, high school sweethearts turned grown-up partners. We had a good life, or so I thought. We had our struggles like any couple, but nothing really prepared me for the chaos that came crashing down in such a brutal way. From the outside, Lisa seemed fine. She was always a little bitchy, quick to snap over nothing, but I figured that was just her personality. She's always been a bit of a drama queen, passive-aggressive, sarcastic, and she loved throwing tantrums over small stuff. Still, I loved her and she'd always come around eventually, so I just brushed it off. Lately, though, there been strange signs, little things that I didn't want to admit meant trouble. She started working late more often, claiming it's just stress at work. But I noticed her phone was always locked with a new code I didn't know, and she'd get defensive when I asked her about it. She also started taking emergency sessions with a counselor, which she insisted were just to help her cope with her personal issues. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured everyone needs therapy, right? But looking back, that should have been my first warning sign. Then came the hotel receipts. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night and my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from our joint credit card statement. I opened the app casually, trying to see if there was anything urgent, but what I saw made my stomach drop. There were charges from a hotel downtown, charges that I knew Lisa had no reason to be making. They weren't big, but they were enough to make my heart race. It was late, and I wasn't planning to confront her that night, but the seed of doubt was planted deep. The next day, I started paying more attention. I noticed her stalling when I asked about her day, avoiding eye contact, and being overly defensive when I mentioned the charges. She told me I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I was just insecure about her working late or talking to some counselor, about stuff I wasn't supposed to know. She called me controlling, insecure, and even accused me of being jealous over nothing. But I knew better. I knew something was up because I'd seen enough to tell that something wasn't right. And then, the worst part was how she lied so effortlessly. She could look me in the eye and deny everything, even when I confronted her with the hotel receipts. She told me it was just a business trip she forgot to tell me about, or that she'd gone out with friends and stayed at a hotel because she was too drunk to go home. That was the first real crack in the foundation of trust, and I felt this cold, sinking feeling in my gut. Because I knew she was lying, I could tell. And I wasn't even sure what was more painful, knowing she was cheating or knowing she was willing to lie so blatantly. That night, I stayed awake longer than I'd like to admit, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I'd just discovered. My mind kept circling back to the hotel charges, the way she dodged my questions, the emotional dissonance I felt. I'd spent years building a life with her, and now it felt like I was staring into a huge abyss that I didn't even know was there. I felt betrayed, angry, and completely lost. I'd always believed in honesty, in loyalty, but now I wasn't so sure anymore. This was the kind of betrayal that hits you like a freight train, and I was just trying to catch my breath. The moments that followed were like a slow descent into chaos. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her smug smile when she lied, her quick, dismissive tone when she denied everything. I kept asking myself how I missed the signs, how I let it get this far without seeing what was really going on. That weekend, I decided I had to confront her. I didn't want to just sit on this anymore. I needed answers, real answers. I waited until she was in the kitchen, flipping through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I took a deep breath and said, "Lisa, I know about the hotel charges. I saw the receipts. What the hell is going on?" She froze for a second, then turned to me with that bitchy smirk she always has when she's about to lie her ass off. "Oh, that," she said, leaning against the counter. "It's nothing, just some stupid mistake, probably from a business trip I forgot to tell you about. You're overthinking things again, Jeff. You always do." I clenched my fists. "Don't lie to me. I saw the charges, I saw the hotel receipts, and I know you're cheating on me." Her eyes flashed with anger and she scoffed. "You're crazy, you're paranoid, you're insecure." Maybe if you weren't so controlling, I wouldn't have to run off and have a little bit of fun. That was the moment I realized she was willing to turn this into a fight. She was good at deflecting, at twisting everything around to make herself look innocent. But I wasn't buying it. I could feel my blood boiling. I told her I didn't want to hear her lies anymore. I wanted the truth. And she finally snapped, her voice rising. Fine, Jeff. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone. Yes, I've been sleeping with the counselor. What do you want me to say? That I've been miserable and you've been too busy with work to notice, that I was lonely. Well, too bad, I don't love you anymore, I don't even like you that much. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, trying to process what she just confessed so coldly. I felt all the blood drain from my face, and for a second I wondered if I was dreaming, but no. The words were real and the truth was out in the open. I wanted to scream, to yell, to tear her apart for what she'd done. But I just stood there, stunned and numb. My mind was racing. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me? How deep was her betrayal? I was furious, but at the same time I felt a crushing sadness, like everything I believed in was shattered in that moment. Her face was so cold and unrepentant. She looked at me like I was just some inconvenience. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was intentional. She planned this from the start, or at least she'd been carrying this secret for a long time. The love I thought we had was apparently disposable to her. It was like I'd been living in some fantasy world, and now I was wide awake, drowning in the reality that she'd betrayed me with the very person I thought was supposed to help her. I remember feeling my knees weaken, fighting back the urge to break down right there. I asked her how long she'd been with him, and she shrugged. A few months, she said casually, like it was no big deal, like she'd just moved on from me without a second thought. That's when I knew I had to get out of that house, get away from her, and start figuring out what was next. Because this was the kind of betrayal that changes everything. And I knew deep down I'd never trust her again. The minutes after her confession felt like they dragged on forever, but in reality it was just a matter of seconds before I snapped. My mind was racing, a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching myself from a distance, trying to hold it together. I wanted to scream at her, to tear her apart, but I couldn't even find my voice. Instead, I just stared at her, watching her smirk, that same bitchy smirk, as if she'd won some twisted game. I took a step back, trying to keep my composure, but inside I was losing it. How could she be so cold? How could she lie so effortlessly, knowing she'd just crushed me? I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shake her, to yell at her for being such a selfish, manipulative bitch. I wanted to break her into pieces, but I knew that wouldn't fix anything. It was just the beginning of a long, painful road. I told her she needed to leave, that I didn't want to see her face anymore, not until she could be honest with herself and with me. She looked surprised, like she didn't expect me to react so strongly, but she didn't argue. She just threw her purse over her shoulder, shot me one last cold look, and walked out the door without a word. I stood there, watching her walk away, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. The house suddenly felt huge and empty, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. That night I stayed up long past midnight, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The lies, the deceit, the moments I missed. I kept asking myself how I hadn't seen it earlier, how I'd let this go on for so long without catching on. I kept thinking about the hotel receipts, the secret meetings, her cold face when she lied to me about everything. I felt betrayed on every level, emotionally, physically, spiritually. This wasn't just cheating. It was a betrayal of everything I thought we stood for. My friends told me I should kick her out, file for divorce, cut all ties, but part of me hesitated. Maybe a small voice in my head still clung to hope, hope that somehow, maybe, things could be fixed, that she'd come clean and admit she was wrong. But deep down, I knew better. I knew she didn't care about fixing anything. She'd already moved on, and I was just the fool left behind. The hardest part was realizing I'd spent nearly a decade building a life with her, trusting her with everything, and she'd been sneaking around behind my back the whole time. I felt like a fool. I felt used, but I also felt dangerous, like I needed to do something, anything, to regain some sense of control. I decided that I'd gather all the evidence, plan my next steps carefully, and make sure I knew exactly how deep her lies went. I can't lie, that night was a hell I never anticipated going through. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her smirk, her coldness. I kept asking myself how I could have been so blind, so naive, so trusting. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was coming, and I had to get ready for whatever was next, because I wasn't going down without a fight. I was hurt, furious, and ready to make her pay for what she'd done. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. My head was pounding, and my stomach was tied in knots. I kept thinking about what I'd do next, how I'd confront her, what kind of revenge I could plan. But mostly, I felt a mixture of betrayal and fury that refused to let me go. I could sleep on it, I had to act. First thing, I pulled out the credit card statement from last night. I needed to know everything, every hotel, every charge, every detail that could help me understand just how long she'd been doing this. I went through it slowly, checking each transaction. There it was, another hotel charge, this time with a date I recognized. It was just a few days ago. She'd been lying the entire time, hiding her secret trips, sneaking around behind my back. It was like I was living in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I decided I had to do something. I wasn't just going to sit around and get hurt. I wanted her to feel what I felt, betrayed, humiliated, and angry. I knew I had to gather more evidence, so I hid in her phone and started digging through her messages, her emails. I needed proof, something solid that I could use to confront her again or even show her family and friends if it came to that. While searching, I found more than I bargained for. There were messages with the counselor, flirty, suggestive texts, even some explicit ones. She'd been sexting him for months, maybe longer. It was worse than I thought. She lied about everything, her feelings, her honesty, her loyalty, and I felt the sting of heartbreak all over again. That was the moment I realized I couldn't fix this. Not now, not with her. I took screenshots of everything, her hotel receipts, her texts, her emails. I wanted to build a case, a solid trail of her lies. Then I sat back and thought about how I could use this to get even. I knew she was a bitchy, manipulative liar, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. I wasn't just going to leave her and walk away with empty hands. I wanted her to feel the pain she'd inflicted on me, to understand how deeply she'd hurt me. I decided I needed a plan. First, I'd talk to a lawyer, see what my options were. Then I'd talk to her family, maybe. I wanted her to understand that I knew everything, her lies, her cheating, her betrayal. I needed her to pay, one way or another. Not just emotionally, but publicly if I had to. I wasn't going to let her get away with it that easily. She'd think she could just lie, cheat, and walk out like nothing had happened. Not a chance. In the meantime, I kept my cool around her. She came back home that day, acting as if everything was normal. She threw attitude, trying to brush past me like I was just some obstacle she could ignore. But I didn't let her. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew everything about the hotel, the texts, the affair. Her face turned pale for a second, then she shot me a venomous look. That's when I saw it, her true colors. She was angry, defensive, and desperate. She knew she'd been caught and she didn't like it. I stayed calm, though. I knew I had her cornered now. I told her I wasn't going to be her fool anymore. I said I was done being played, that she'd better start preparing for what was coming next. She spat back some vile lies, trying to manipulate me, trying to turn it around on me, but I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I had enough evidence, proof of her lies, her betrayal. I was ready to take the next step, whatever that might be, because I wasn't just going to forgive and forget, not this time, not after everything she'd done to me. After that confrontation, I knew I couldn't stay under the same roof with her. The house suddenly felt like a trap, full of her lies and fake smiles. I couldn't stand to see her face, knowing what she had done. I needed space, clarity. I told her she had to leave immediately. She didn't argue much, just threw a tantrum, calling me controlling and paranoid again, but I didn't care. Her words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was getting her out of my sight and figuring out my next move. I started making arrangements. I contacted a lawyer first, trying to understand my rights, what I needed to do to protect myself financially and legally. She had no job, no real assets, just the house and her bullshit attitude. but I wasn't taking any chances. I wanted to make sure I covered all my bases. I also contacted a therapist myself because I needed to process all this. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, it was overwhelming. Meanwhile, she was still here, trying to manipulate me, trying to guilt me into forgiving her. She kept crying, throwing tantrums, begging to stay, saying she'd change, promising she'd stop seeing the counselor, that she loved me. But I knew better. I saw her for what she was, a liar and a cheat who had no respect for our marriage or my feelings. I refused to be fooled again. I told her I'd think about everything, but I knew deep down I'd already made up my mind. I couldn't keep living in her web of lies. I moved out temporarily, staying at a friend's place. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, leaving the house, leaving the life I thought we had. But I couldn't stay there pretending everything was okay. Every time I looked at her, I remembered what she'd done. The hotel receipts, the texts, her cold attitude, everything confirmed she didn't care about me anymore. I was hurt, yes, but I also felt angry, furious at her, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. In the days that followed, I kept gathering evidence. I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next, whether it was a legal battle, a messy breakup, or maybe even some twisted attempt at reconciliation. I knew I wouldn't forgive her easily, if at all. Every time I looked at her, I saw her lie. Her manipulative face, her bitchy attitude, how she'd spun her web of deceit. I wanted justice, or at least to make her regret what she'd done. I also had to deal with the emotional fallout. I'd lost my trust, my sense of security, my belief in our marriage. I was torn between heartbreak and rage. Part of me still loved her, stupid, I know, and was hoping she'd come clean, tell me she was sorry and want to fix this. But the other part knew better. I'd been played, used, discarded, and I'd never trust her again. That realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Now I'm just waiting to see if she'll fight to stay, or if she'll just accept that she's burned every bridge. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I won't be the same person after this. I learned a lot about trust, betrayal, and the importance of paying attention to the signs. But mostly, I learned that some people are capable of so much bullshit. They'll lie and cheat right in front of your face and still act like the victim. And I'll be damned if I let her get away with it. In the end, I realized that this whole ordeal changed me forever. I thought I knew Lisa, the woman I married, the woman I loved, the woman I trusted. Turns out she was nothing like that. She was a liar, a manipulator, someone who could betray everything we built over the years with a reckless disregard for my feelings. The pain was brutal, but it forced me to confront the reality that sometimes people aren't who they seem. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's nearly impossible to repair. I moved on, slowly rebuilding my life from the wreckage of what I thought was a perfect marriage. I cut ties with her completely. The house was sold, and I started fresh in a new place with new goals. I learned to be cautious, more guarded, more aware. I also learned that revenge isn't about hurting her back. It's about reclaiming your own peace and dignity. I didn't want her to control my emotions anymore. I wanted to prove to myself that I was stronger than her lies, stronger than her betrayal. Looking back, I see that this experience, as painful as it taught me some hard lessons about love, trust, and survival. I learned that some betrayals cut so deep, they leave scars that never fully heal. But I also learned that I have the strength to move forward, to rebuild what's broken, and to find happiness again, even after the worst betrayal. To anyone going through something similar, trust your gut. Don't ignore the signs. And if you find yourself in a situation where your partner cheats or lies, remember that your worth isn't defined by their actions. You deserve honesty, loyalty, and respect. Don't settle for less. Because in the end, the only person responsible for your happiness is you. Stand up, face the truth, and don't be afraid to walk away if that's what you need to do. It hurts, but it's also the start of something better.